So here is sort of what the kind of sound that really opened the doors for the Klezmer revival. This is a recording by Abe Schwartz's orchestra. This was made in 1923. This is called Khope. It's a large band. This is a kind of band that was recording in the 1920s, obviously affected by the advent of military marching bands, but also by the recording industry, because in Europe, what was the quintessential klezmer instrument was the violin. When people came to the United States, this sort of turned around, and the clarinet kind of became the thing that people wanted to hear. For one thing, it recorded well. Secondly, in the kind of rooms that people were having functions in, it was easier to hear. It was also, like any music, it was klezmer music and Yiddish music in general was starting to change because of where it was. So the music began to acquire elements of, in the 1920s, for instance, you're talking about them hearing Dixieland, you're talking about hearing early jazz, and so these things start to be reflected in klezmer music. You hear clarinet, you sometimes hear banjo, you sometimes hear saxophone, and you also later on you start to hear drums. Although early on you don't hear much drumming because the recording apparatus didn't deal well with percussion. So you sometimes hear a wood block, you sometimes hear a cymbal crash, but in general, very little percussion until a bit later. So this recording is particularly rare because the label lasted about a year. It was called the Strong label, and I think Abe Schwartz made two sides for this label, and then the label disbanded. Abe Schwartz recorded for a couple of labels, and what you find is that until a bit later on, a lot of artists weren't exclusive with anybody, so they have a hit song or a hit tune, and they go from one company to another and record them. So sometimes people were they were competing with themselves. So this is a lovely, nice Freilatz, a dance tune called Khope, from the Khope. These early Klezmer records, which actually continues on pretty much through the 1950s. Well, the 1950s it changes a little bit, but find that these klezmer bands were asked to have names, to give the names for these tunes, and generally, klezmer tunes didn't have names. What we now call klezmer tunes didn't have names. They would just, call it, dance tune number 3, or Shloima's tune, or this person's tune, and they didn't have names. So people had to kind of on the spot make up names for these songs, and sometimes you find the same song with different names. The other thing is that in general, people would perform these tunes in long medleys, so that people could dance, for a long time. But on these records, in their little 3.5-minute records, you couldn't do that. So they would play one tune over and over and over again. So these records are very kind of they're static in a way, in the sense that they basically repeat the same arrangement, the same thing over and over and over again. Still, for a student of this music, this stuff is fascinating and endlessly studyable, because there's so much information contained in this. I mean, these people who play this music, they're not studio musicians. They're people who play this music, in live performing situations. So you hear ornamentation, you hear what the function of different instruments are in relation to each other. You hear people taking different sections, different instruments taking different sections. All sorts of interesting things that help you learn more about playing this music.